Welcome to the Linebreak Rugby podcast. You've got myself, Sav. I'm your host today, and I've got Fred with me. And we did have someone else, but sadly their recording's gone missing. But Fred's still going to try and give us the best insight he can give.
It's just not going to be great, let's be honest.
It's going to be good. So we're going to start our podcast now with a new feature. We're going to start this every week, hopefully. And we're just going to name two players to each other, and we have to kind of figure out whether we think that they had a bad performance or a good performance over the weekend. And I think as the game progresses over the weeks, we're going to start picking trickier and trickier and more technical ideas. But to start with, it's going to be quite easy. I'm just going to give two names. My first name is Will Genia, and my second name is Faf de Klerk. Yeah.
Right, so you went for two guys in the same position.
Yeah.
You actually stole my idea.
Oh, okay.
But luckily enough, I prefer forwards.
Okay. Oh,
so,
sorry.
Tough one. So it seems pretty obvious that you can say Will Genia had a cracking game and Faf de Klerk didn't. But I'm not sure about Faf de Klerk, actually. I'm not sure if you're looking at positives and negatives, because I know you really like him in general, and so do I. He's this fast, full of energy player, but like we've talked before, and I know this is your opinion, I don't really have an opinion on this, is that he probably gives the ball out too quickly, or is always in a hurry and gives a good ball out quickly, but isn't necessarily suiting South Africa's style. At the moment.
Yeah, that's part of it. I think for me, Will Genia played out of his skin. He's played better than he played in a long time in that game, and I think he's not so much like shut people up, but he's certainly. I was looking at it going like Genia's okay, but he hasn't really shown the form that he used to back in 2010 or 2013, those sorts of years. But he really came out and just proved that he can play top level test rugby and dominate still.
Oh yeah. And so on that, I think Genia, if he plays for Stade Francais in Paris, and he hasn't played very much lately. He's been mostly behind Julien Dupuis, who has played for France, who is a very good club player, and who's a kicker as well, which helps because Plisson's not always on his game.
Yeah.
So I think Genia, he hasn't played a lot of rugby. He's been away from Australia, so they had really no idea what he can do, and they had, I think, a pretty reliable option in Phipps. But Genia overall is the guy that can light up, and like it seems
he gets Cooper ticking along.
Yeah, and it seems like it's been forever since we've seen Genia at his top form, because he was absolutely amazing when he came on the international scene, but he was very young. He was like 19, 20. Then it's been a few years where everyone's gone like, well, Genia, he's good, but he's not the 2010, 2011 Genia, the one that was playing with Cooper at the Reds, who was just dominating Super Rugby. So yeah, it's great to see him back.
And I think this is something that Guinea has always done quite well, is his decision-making off the base of the scrum. And this is why I chose Faf de Klerk as my second player, because I think that's the real weakness in Faf de Klerk's game. He plays so fast because he assumes that if you play fast, you'll be playing against a broken defence. And because you're playing fast, you can make up for it if you've got the skills, which is true in most cases. In fact, when he plays for the Lions, it's pretty much true. They can make up for any bad calls because they're playing so fast, there's always going to be gaps. But because he's playing at that quick level, at test level, rather than playing what's in front of him, it doesn't quite work as well for me. I'm looking at it and I'm going, just in certain situations, you don't need to play fast at that point. And he can play, and he can play really well, but I think that somebody needs to let him know that he can be the all-round scrum half, and that sometimes giving it one out and then a tip on to someone else in the forwards, that just sets up for the next quick ruck. It doesn't necessarily always have to go quick all the time. It's a nuanced view. I don't think it's necessarily that he's actually had a bad performance. I just didn't think he had the best performance for what South Africa needed. essentially.
Yeah, and he's playing in a team that's really struggling at the moment. So right now, Australia finally got a win.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, two wins. Sorry. But against South Africa, finally got a win, and then against Argentina, they kept the momentum going. And it's difficult to say what they're going to do in the other two games against them. But South Africa right now seems to be at a pretty low point. So I think 9 is definitely not their weakest point.
Oh, it's certainly not their weakest point, but I think it's because he's new, so I'm picking on him, and I should be picking on Yantes, but I think it's the link between the two of them so quick, like it just that link to me needs to build, and although they're obviously playing together a lot and they're playing at a high tempo together a lot, there's one of them needs to step up with the game management, and I think at the moment Yantes not necessarily confident, and Faf de Klerk is quite confident. So I'm putting it on him, but equally Yantes could step up and make that game management cool. But it's hard to do it. If the 9's already passed it to you, it's very hard to then set up a one-phase ball to try and just get a clean ball off the next one, because you're already going at such a quick pace. If that makes sense.
Yeah,
does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. What I'm thinking of is the discussion we had yesterday that wasn't properly recorded. We talked about Yantes and the situation that he's in. He's fairly new to the Springboks to this level. He's had a brilliant season with the Lions, and basically he's in a very difficult environment because he's got a lot of fans on his back, not happy with his performance, not happy with the coaching, not happy with the politics around the Springboks, and he's just in such a horrible situation where there's not much he can do right apart from magically overperforming and impressing everyone, which is really hard in the position he's in.
Against what some might argue are the hardest teams
against
in
the
the
best
world
teams
right
in
now.
the world. I mean,
Yeah.
Right now we saw in June we saw a really really strong England, but apart from that, it's fairly obvious that the three teams they're playing against are the best teams in the world. It's not an easy one to get into.
It's very difficult. I mean, you're playing against an Argentina team that are now Super Rugby ready and hungry. You're playing against a New Zealand team that's looking untouchable, and you are. I mean, for what it's worth, Yantes is playing against a back row in Australia at the very least. That is still a very strong back row, and they're going to be hunting him every time he touches the ball. So, to me, he's in the hardest position out of any of the fly halves right now. Even Foley and Cooper, I think they've got an easier job, even though they're playing in a team that was going backwards. They've got an easier job.
I think they do have an easier job and have so much more experience under their belt as well.
Yeah,
that's a big difference.
They've both been parachuted in. Faf de Klerk and Yantes have been almost parachuted into this impossible environment to perform, and you don't want to blame anybody particularly, because obviously there's a lot of rubbish going around. The fans are angry. Lots of people are angry about every situation every time it gets brought up. But just something has to realise that these people are human. They're trying to do their jobs, and there's a lot of anger being directed towards them. And a lot of people almost... So I saw a comment in one of the threads saying, I can't wait for Canada and Italy to put 50 points on the Springboks after all of this nonsense. And I was just thinking to myself, you are not understanding that nobody wants that. The Springboks don't want that. Anybody pushing for any specific thing, nobody should be wanting to watch these players that are coming through and have worked so hard to join a national team. You shouldn't be begging for their failure. I don't know. It's just not... I don't like it very
you have
much.
a very toxic... It's hard. I was going to say a very toxic fan base. Obviously, it's not true of the whole fan base. It's just the one that you hear. So whether it's 10% of the people, or it's 1, or it's 90, I can't tell. I'm not in South Africa, but it's difficult because those voices are louder than the others, and it's making it very difficult for the players, for the coaches, for the entire environment.
Well, everybody in that team wants to be there on merit. I mean, everybody is pushing and working absolutely 110% to be there on merit. And, obviously you've got that environment and people are talking about different things and throwing names around as if they shouldn't be there. And, it's not ever helpful. And I think...
It is unhelpful, yeah. I mean, the name that mostly is talked about is Upa Mahoji.
A couple of high tackles. But he had a good game, didn't he, the other day? And everybody kind of... shimmered down on it.
But what I want to tell those guys is maybe he's not good enough. That's highly possible. But he's still. You can't argue that he's not in the top, let's say, 50 players in South Africa. If he's in the top 50 players in the whole country, then it's up to the coaching staff to see what training and around it what we might not see. So it's not like he was parachuted out of nowhere. Is barely a rugby player. He's still a top level professional athlete. And if you say that he is the quota player by definition, I find it a bit weird that you have another guy like Khaleesi, who is a black player in the same position, who is very good and isn't picked. So it doesn't seem like Upa Mahoji is necessarily taking a white player's place, because he could actually his direct. Competition is actually another black player.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, we don't want to talk about this too much, but we brought up Yantes and Faf de Klerk, and obviously that's going to get brought up. I actually think so. I don't know who would be the other scrum half to play. I don't think Faf should be taken off, but I think if South Africa want game management, they need to have a look.
I was actually going to ask you who the other nines are, because you've got quite a lot of there's a bit of a retired club in the nines in South Africa. Obviously you still have Hugard.
Pienaar's sitting in was it Hugard?
Well, no, Pienaar is in Ulster.
Yeah, he's sitting in Ireland at the moment, isn't he?
I can't remember something about him having to leave with the IRF. I've no idea. I read something about Pienaar. They love him over there, so every time his name is thrown around,
interesting.
It's
Hugard Lambie might be the two new halfbacks for the next game. So
you think Hugard, because
that's what it's saying. Hugard and Lambie.
He's been playing. So before he went to Worcester, he was playing either sevens or he was playing wing.
Oh yeah,
it'd
be interesting. I think that they would be. So the way South Africa are doing things, I think it would be silly not to try someone who's not Faf de Klerk, just to see if he needs to learn a bit of game management. Not that if someone is better than him, because I don't think there's that many people better at what Faf de Klerk does well, but just to see if there's a bit of game management that needs to be drilled into him.
Yeah.
Because, I'll be interesting. I think Hugard might come in and...
Is Fourie du Preez still available? Or is he 40 years old already?
I looked that up. Anyway, so I want you to name your two names while I look up
my two names. So actually, I've got a hooker and now it's outside centre / wing. So the hooker's Tommy Taylor, outside centre is Dane Coles.
All right, this leads us on to the conversation we had yesterday, actually, doesn't it, very nicely. So Tommy Taylor had an absolute blinder, but then so did Dane Coles. So
slightly different level.
Yeah, I mean, are we doing the pros and cons thing again?
Oh yeah, whatever you think about them.
Oh, I think you've picked two positive players. Then I think you've picked two having very good performances. I think Tommy Taylor has stepped up even again. He played very well against Exeter. He was frustrating. He took a massive hit off Hepburn a week ago, and then put another hit on Hepburn in return in the same game. And it looked, to be honest, if I had taken that hit off Hepburn, I think I'd just be in hospital. So the fact that he came back and did it back to him was fantastic, and he played really well again. But then who doesn't against Bristol when you beat them 70 points? Dane Coles is a whole new breed of hooker, and what is 103 kilograms? We looked it up.
Yeah, so I was looking yesterday, and they're both about just above 6 foot, maybe even a bit taller for Taylor, and they're only just above 100 kgs, which is what Wikipedia is saying. So right now, I'm actually looking at I'm looking for him on the Wasps website, because I can't believe he'd be 103, 104 kgs. So it's got to be more than that.
The theory I'm floating out is that scrummaging has changed, and we know that because the engagement calls have changed, and there is no such thing as a straight feed anymore, which means that hooking is not so much a dying art, because obviously you got to throw in, and you do hook sometimes, but you don't often see a competing hook and the ball get challenged in the hooking, which means that the traditional Brian Moores and the traditional players that hook the ball aren't doing it anymore. So they just need to be good at that straight drive, and it's much easier to be good at that straight drive and better at other things. You don't need to have that barrel chest and the ability to hook, because you don't need to be as heavy anymore, because even though you're off balance when you're hooking, if you had a bit of weight behind you, you wouldn't go backwards. Nowadays, you can just be skinny and have a good push. Not skinny. Dane Coles is pretty damn ripped.
I was going to say that's not quite skinny.
It's not skinny, but he's smaller than your Thompson, and Steve Thompson was thought of as being a mobile hooker. Dane Coles is another breed again. Brits is another really skinny hooker. Tommy Taylor, not skinny, but skinny for a hooker. These people are absolutely ripped, but they haven't got ballast. They're not necessarily these big lumps that you just stick in the middle of two props. So the game's becoming more mobile, and I think for me it's all intersecting towards everybody wants to be built a little bit like a sevens player, so like a 7 or a 13, where you're all absolutely the peak physical condition. You're just a physical monstrosity.
Yeah, and my point on that, on the size, and not it's weird because we're not really talking about the players. We're just talking about general rugby.
Yeah.
But, what I think is that when we started being professional, we went for bigger and stronger every position. Mm-hmm. Obviously, props went from being big fat boys to being bit fat boys with a lot of muscle underneath. And then even the number 9s, you got that's when the Mike Phillips arrived, the 100 kg plus scrum half.
Yeah, very tall, very hard to bring down scrum half. Yeah,
and obviously John Olomu, helped a little bit, if not enormously. And now you have
influenced the picking of Severe, if not the actual genetic makeup of him.
Not just Severe, just look at the Welsh backline.
North and
Jonathan Davies, Jamie Roberts, George North, Alex Cuthbert, all these guys are absolutely enormous.
Banahan.
Yeah, Matt Banahan. Well, he's just too enormous, but that's different. And so now we're going back to this, well, not back, but we're because the game's gone faster. We're looking at maybe not necessarily everyone looking the same, but not looking too specific for their position. So you have big hookers, small hookers. You have massive sevens, like Haskell is a 7. He's over 120 kilograms. RD Surveyor is a 7. He's below 100. There's more than 20 kg difference between two of arguably the on-form international 7s. Two
players who are meant to be playing the same role, and the reason it should be in air quotes is because the role is changing. It depends on the coach you're even sitting down with. There's no specific role anymore.
It depends on the coach, it depends on the system, and if you're a smart coach, I think you look at the players you've got, you look at the best guys, and you try to combine them instead of trying to put them into boxes that already exist in your mind and in the mind of fans who go like, oh, we need Stefan Armitage because he's a real 7. Stefan Armitage is a 5 foot, number 8 that looks skinnier than Bastaro. Stop trying to put him in a box. Use him for all the qualities he has, rather than thinking, oh, we actually need this sort of player or that sort of player. Just think, can he fit into our system? Yes or no, and then make sure he can do the job.
See, I think that's quite key for every single team and squad selection, because you can have a player that's playing fantastically at a specific role, and I'm just trying to think of someone who didn't get picked despite playing fantastically a specific role. Perhaps Ashton or May or someone, for England that they
was
have
May fantastic for club.
He has complete raw speed, and my point is he has the quality of a historical winger. He's absolutely rapid. You get the ball in his hands 1-on-1, and he'll just go. like a rabbit. But he doesn't necessarily have all of the qualities that a modern day winger needs, and he can only play winger. And Ashton's got a decent kick on him, to be fair, but defensively they're both flawed. But my point is that they've almost been pigeonholed into a role of winger, of being the quick support line winger, whereas perhaps when they were younger, the coach needed to say, look, we need to build up your whole skill set. You need to be good at most things, otherwise you won't be able to play modern day rugby, because nowadays you've got to be able to do everything. As a modern day rugby player, you have to do everything.
Yeah, and so if you want the modern player, sorry, that is Dane Coles. How many times have you watched that pass for the Whitelock try this weekend?
It was actually textbook. I was rewatching it, and it was ridiculously textbook.
Because I think he's against the back. I'm not quite sure what he's got in front of him, and he's got quite a lot of pace. So you'd think, since Whitelock is quite far, the usual solution would be to barge through whoever's in front of him. There's only
and
a
then
couple.
Try and get an offload.
There's 4 or 5 meters to go. He probably could have gone on his own, but he's got the confidence to get that ball and make 1 or 2 steps, swing it wide in the right timing, in the right position, straight to it, knowing where he's playing. It's just incredible, and it's a really long pass. So it's one that you expect these players to be able to do at training 100% of the time. I mean, if these guys can't do that, they shouldn't be there. But for him to do that at international level, under pressure, at full speed, and it's the right decision, is absolutely ridiculous.
But not only that, you put any second row or hooker in that position from 10, 15 years ago, I'm going to say. So 2003, 2005, that sort of period. If you put any of the second rows or hookers in that position, they would not do what Dane Coles did.
No.
You're not going to see a 20-yard perfectly spiraled pass out to Whitelock for him to go over. You just don't see it. And so and like you said, that just makes him, to me, like you said, and you said it earlier, he is the complete modern day rugby player. He's even got that little bit of angry niggle, which everybody seems to enjoy.
Well, he needs it because he's only 100 kg playing international hooker.
Yeah. It's a fascinating thing. I do love it.
Whenever I think I see a player not giving a shit pass or something where you think, well, he seems like his skill set isn't really complete or isn't that great, and you go like, well, they're playing at quite a high level. I remember that these guys one day may have to be in a ruck facing Ivan Etzebeth.
Yeah, they've got to hold him off the ruck.
Just the fact that in their mind they think, it's a good idea to go on a rugby pitch when there's this guy on the other side. Is absolutely beyond me.
So we're gonna roll it on, and we're gonna talk about now the role of a manager or a coach, the DOR maybe, but within club rugby, within international rugby, and how they actually interact with game day. Because we came to a realization, and this might be an interesting one to everybody listening, that most coaches, compared to, and this is different from what happens in football, they sit in the stands and they'll watch the game and they'll communicate through microphones and headpieces and stuff to water boys and other coaches on the touchline. So they're not on the stands directing play like the Alex Fergusons or Mourinho's of the world. They're sitting at the back of the stands looking at everything. And Fred has an interesting podcast and idea from that podcast that he's going to share with us.
Yeah, so there's 2 things I take from this, God, I can't find my words.
The rugby coaching
this
corner?
Observation, what you just said. So from this observation that most coaches in the Aviva Prem are in the stands, I think it tells you 2 things. One, that there's a big difference in what you said as well. There's a big difference between being the on pitch during training coach and being the director of rugby. These are 2 different roles, and they can combine. They don't necessarily have to combine. And it's what a lot of people have been saying that Stuart Lancaster wasn't doing. They were saying, he wasn't coaching. He was just being in the stands, not doing anything, talking about culture. That's a slightly different thing, but it's just to say that this is an important question of what's the role of the coach or director of rugby. And the other one is on game day, what kind of information can you give your players as a coach, either from the sideline or from the stands? What can you see? What can you observe? How can you?
What's useful to give to people
exactly
at that time?
That's it. Yeah. What's useful at what time and with what delivery, and what kind of responsibilities do you give your players to adapt themselves? There's quite a lot of questions in there. So the podcast I was listening to, and I've talked about it a few times on here, is the Rugby Coaches Corner podcast. It's an Australian guy who lives in Canada, and he gets guests every week, every time on. That are sometimes from rugby, sometimes not from rugby, but that specialise in different areas of coaching. And this person was talking about how to prepare to be a coach on game day, how to prepare the team and interact with the team. Yeah. How do you prepare yourself to interact with the team? How do you prepare mentally for your performance? Because you actually have a performance, even though you're not on the pitch. Your actions and your decisions are very important. So on game day, your actions are mostly observation to observing what's happening. Changing some of the instructions that you had pre-game to adapt to that, and managing the team, making the right decisions of who's coming on, who's coming off. So that is basically your job.
What I get from that idea is that and now that you've just mentioned that again for the second time, I think the first time I came up with a comparison of coaches in my head of people who do one style and maybe do the other, but now I'm thinking about Woodward, Clive Woodward, or Sir Clive Woodward, if you want to get really British about the whole thing.
Not going to happen.
But essentially, what I got from him is when he does his Sky analysis, and he's not a great pundit, and he's a bad commentator, but he's obviously a good coach. We know that. But he came up with this halftime talk idea that I saw on analysis, and it was basically just focusing on one specific thing that the whole team could do. He wasn't trying to micromanage. He wasn't telling players, oh, you missed that turnover, or oh, you missed that pass. He wasn't trying to point out individual errors and make sure that they got better at that. He was driving a whole team towards a common purpose. So up your work rate, I think, was one of the things that you all could do, because he saw that they dropped flat in the last 10 minutes, and he knew that they could all raise their game in a certain way. And then there was another thing that a French coach said that I saw, that the one thing they changed against New Zealand when they beat them in 2000 and whatever, he changed one thing, and that was the way they tackled. Rather than tackle low and allow the offload, every single time they said, right, don't tackle low, we're now just tackling high. And that was the only thing they changed.
They changed the rest their defense,
of it, the rest of it, they basically played as normal.
I think it's an English coach as well. I'm not sure. He's definitely not
French.
French.
He was a guy from Yorkshire.
Yeah, that was the defence coach for France, and no one even knew he was part of the staff. That was kind of a surprise.
But that was the thing. That was the thing they changed, and I just thought there's a lot of times when you told me earlier that coaches get very they don't mentally prepare for a game, and as a result of that, they respond instantly to decisions, and they get very angry.
Yeah, if your coach is on the sideline, first of all, he can't see much more than so if you're put yourself in the coach's boots, you're on the sideline, you can see what's going on. You can't see exactly what the players are seeing, but it's a fairly similar angle. It's a fairly similar position. So what most people do, and they end up doing, is literally commentating on what happened, like they're a fan, or like they're one of the players on the bench. And most of the time, that information that might be completely right, that's not the point, is too late or is not necessary. So you get this, like the example you said, you missed a tackle, you missed 2 tackles, you didn't do this, you didn't do that, or that went well. There's also positives, obviously. How much of this information is actually useful to the players? Because all of this information is surely useful to the next week to prepare for the next game. But in the game, you've got to pick and choose which information is most important and what they need to adapt to right now. So if you're in the stands, what you can see is much broader. You can see the position of your defense, the position of their defense. You can give them hints and clues on how they can unlock situations.
So, I mean that's all interesting in the way, and I think it's the sign of a good coach, because obviously we were talking about earlier. Again, they're all sitting in the stands nowadays, which to modern football, when we look at the NFL, they're not actually sitting in the stands. They're sitting at the sideline with a mic set on, sure, but they're not sitting in the stands. So it's quite, I don't know, I think it's almost unique. I can't think of another game where the coaches are sitting in the stand. Baseball, they're on the side of the pitch. Football, they're on the side of the pitch. Basketball, they're on the side of the pitch. Rugby seems to be the only one where they're so far back and they're actually just overseeing it.
It's difficult. Like, for example, one I can think of that's actually unique in its own way is tennis, where the coach is in the stands but isn't really allowed to talk to the player.
He's not allowed to do much,
But what they really do is they end up shouting a couple of things, pretend they're angry, and the player gets the information.
Yeah.
If you watch a bit of tennis, it's always interesting to see how much the umpire lets the coaches shout.
Do a bit of actual coaching, yeah.
Yeah, because they always do a little bit.
So that's interested me, and obviously we know they're relaying information via water buoys and headsets and stuff. They're getting the information on, but it's just not a direct line of shouting. It's become a lot more technical and a lot more interesting.
And it also has to do with what you can do as an outsider, and there's so much you can do. You can help your defense be in the right position. You can help them adapt. You can see, this team is not. For example, you've got a rush defense. Your whole defense is based on attacking the line with a lot of speed, and you see that they got deeper and they got the ball to the fullback and they got around. If you're the coach and you see that twice, obviously you hope your players have realised it themselves, but. Then you can tell them, okay, now let's stop this, it's not working, let's adapt, let's change the defense because right now this isn't working. This is the kind of information that the coach is so useful for. It's not for telling the player, pass it left, pass it right, do this. There's not much information that you can give them that is live, because you're not helping them. They've already got another 29 players to think of around them.
So to me, it's just interesting. I'd never thought of it before, and obviously we had that conversation, and it just brought it all home to me that's the way they were running things, and obviously there's a difference in styles of coaches, of people who have. So we talk about Baxter and we talk about Cockrell, and we'll talk about other coaches that I can't think of right now. Checker gets very angry as well after the game. So Checker and Cockrell, I would say, they respond quite a lot to what refs do. And even if they're not actually, even if they're smarter than that, they come out as if they are, because it takes their attention off their players one way or another. Them being angry is perhaps more of a talking point than their players not playing very well. So they can take some of the fire. But either way, they come across as if, and they're just getting angry. And it doesn't seem that has any purpose. Like you're saying, there's no reason. That's not helpful in any situation. Whereas when I hear Baxter come out and to a point, Stuart Lancaster, I wouldn't say that was a good example, because Lancaster, I think, got a bit less analytical with the media. But certainly Baxter, when he comes out, he gives away that Exeter are going to move forward. We lost 2 games. He gave away that we were going to come out of that, and then we beat Quins, and everybody's reasonably happy. Nobody lost faith that Exeter weren't a good team, because Baxter came out and said, look, 2 hard games, we got a losing bonus point, but we're going to come back, and this is how we're going to do it. He provided us with a glimmer of hope. And obviously, different coaches do it in different ways. I think you said last time that maybe people don't want to reveal their game plans.
Yeah, and yeah, exactly. They don't necessarily want to reveal. It's just also your personality. So a coach like Checker might be not give much information in the press conference, whereas Baxter will be quite analytical, almost scientific about it. Whereas another coach might just say, "Oh, we're lost, we're not happy," and that's basically it. But if you look at it when they win, maybe probably those two coaches still have the same reaction. One says, "Oh, this is why we won." And we want to keep improving, whereas the other would say, "Oh, we won, we're very happy."
Oh, the Saracens after coach. I've forgotten it now. He's very good for Sereni Bombo or something. I've forgotten it now.
What?
It's the Saracens coach completely loses it in a post-game interview. They just lost, and he's just like, "Hip hip, 3 cheers for Sereni Bombo," I think, or something like that.
Oh yeah, that's an old video when they ask him, what went wrong, and he goes like, "I don't know. We'll have to look at it."
I have to look. Yes, lack of passion.
I don't know.
Yes, maybe.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, he just completely loses it with the reporter. He does not want to be there.
I think it's amazing. There's so much honesty in that interview where he just goes like, "I honestly have no idea what went wrong."
No, I think he was just bored of it. He was bored of having this interaction.
Maybe at some point he went a bit crazy, like I said, but at the start it was just blatantly honest, going like, "I have no idea what went wrong."
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's maybe I will need to watch it again. That was quite a long time ago, but
he was
amazing.
Yeah, maybe he didn't know what went wrong, but he was upset. I can tell you that he was was definitely upset. So yeah, I mean, coaches deal with it differently, but I thought that the minority was sitting in the stands when I first thought about this, but then I realised that everybody does it. So yeah, we had something else lined up, but I've actually forgotten the topic.
I'm looking at my notes because I have notes. I'm a pro. I can write. I can't see anything.
Here, more about communication. Eddie Jones couldn't get the communication to the Japanese team to take 3 points. So when Japan beat South Africa, Eddie actually wanted to take the 3 and draw. He didn't want them to take the scrum and go for the win because he thought a draw for Japan would be good enough in the World Cup. But he couldn't get the message out there quick enough because by the time that the message was out there, they'd already called for the scrum. So, I think that obviously looking back in hindsight, him meddling would have been a bad thing. But it's quite interesting that a coach couldn't actually communicate quickly enough to his players to do something. Yeah. So how much influence does a coach actually have on the end result when the game's being played?
And how much it's very interesting because in that game, let's start by saying I think going for 3 in that situation was the right decision for Japan.
It was a smart move. And because also on top of that, sorry, I'm just gonna on top of that, that one play at the end isn't what won the game for Japan, if that makes sense. It was.
Oh, yeah, fully agree.
But they were in that position because they played so well through the whole game.
For 80 minutes, yeah.
You don't score 30-odd points and not,
No, so they had an excellent performance for 78 minutes, 79 minutes. And then they get this situation where they have to decide between getting a draw in a game that was lost before it started in everyone's mind, or they go for a ridiculous, unbelievable win that we're still celebrating today, despite having nothing to do with Japan. So they went for the win, which is fantastic. It changed rugby history. And for once, when we say that, it's actually true.
Yeah.
But let's look at Japan's goals. They went to the World Cup in a difficult pool with both South Africa and Scotland, saying our objective is to qualify for the quarterfinals. That was their number one objective in the competition. So if you want to go to the quarterfinals, your important game is the next week. It's not even the next week. It's four days later or 5 days later against Scotland. And everyone said, they're going to bring in a shit team against South Africa because their big game is against Scotland. They put out their best team because they wanted to give it a fight, which is fantastic. They didn't, because a lot of coaches would have put a shit team. would have put a second string to play the big
and
team against
the
Scotland.
then the whole world would have understood. The whole world would have gone, "Yep, makes sense."
Yeah, makes sense.
I would
Fair
play
enough.
a bad team. Why kill Michael Leach, who's fairly old? Why kill Goromuro, who can kick it from anywhere? Why have the possibility of going up against big bruising South African team, getting injured, and not being able to beat Scotland? Yeah.
And an hour and a half later, they find themselves in a situation where they can draw against South Africa, which is a huge result for them, and gives them 2 points, which is huge, or maybe even 3. Is there a bonus point for tries? I'd have to check.
I think Goromuro kicked quite a few pens, so I don't know if they had that many tries.
I think he definitely scored a try as well. So
they
maybe
scored
not.
2 tries and maybe that one at the end. So I don't know if they got 4.
No,
I'm not sure.
Okay. So probably 2 points, which is huge against South Africa for them. So yeah, it's fantastic that the coach didn't manage to give his advice. It's actually really weird that the players went let's go for the win, but after 79 minutes of being in a game where no one would think they could be in, fair enough that they thought, right, fuck it, let's go.
Yeah, 100%.
Can't blame the decision on
Can't
whoever
fault them
was
at all.
Sorry, not whoever. Michael Leach was the captain.
Yeah, he made the call. Super rugby man. He knows the game inside out. He knew the South Africa were obviously tiring. They had the upper hand and thought he could get over the whitewash. And he did score actually.
And they did, which is absolutely fantastic.
Leach scored earlier in the game as well. So.
Oh, have you got the score line?
No, I just watched the highlights yesterday. Obviously, everybody's talking about it because it happened yesterday.
So have I, but I completely forgot. I just watched the last bit because it's just I can't really help it.
It's just fantastic, isn't it? It was just a fascinating piece of rugby history. Anyway, we're gonna sign it off there.
So there were only 2 tries before the final one, by Leach and Goromaro. So the captain and the national hero.
Just fantastic. And now they've got a new national hero, and I've forgotten his name. How sad's that? Is it Isa? Who scored? Isco, maybe? Isco scored the final try? Escus, was it?
Yeah.
It's
in front of me.
Okay, cool. Alright. So yeah, we're going to sign out now, and we're going to... This will be the end of the podcast. What a sad time.
Yeah, we're going to leave you with Sav's favourite music.
The outro music again. I love the outro music, guys. Don't rip into it.
Yeah, that is a problem. How much you love this outro music.
We need what do we need? Do we need any questions? Just comment below.
Yeah, we're always happy
give us a like.
Questions.
Subscribe to whichever format this podcast you're watching it. At the moment, we're putting them up on YouTube, but we're actually looking to put them on other mediums as well. So if this is on a new medium, you've probably entered listening to the podcast at a very strange time that we've actually done something, which is interesting.
And so unlikely.
And very, very unlikely. But yeah, if you're listening to this in 20 years' time, then you're in the wrong place.
Right, now that we're famous.
Okay. No, it won't be famous. It'll be like back end of the internet, like someone's dusting off old like floppy disk or something.
Yeah, and they look, listen to how crappy Fred was at the time. Now, when he wasn't a billionaire.
Yeah, when he hadn't killed all those children.
To be fair, he did save the planet.
It's such a confusing roller coaster.
we don't know where we're going with this.
Yeah, outro music's playing. Goodbye. I've been Sav, he's been Fred. The outro music's playing a lovely tune right over our voices. Oh, and click on one of the links. I'll have put annotations up over the top of this. Click on one of the links. We've got rant videos. We've got Fred's video about being French and how he transitioned to being English. It's fascinating stuff. The Anglo-French relations video. Don't worry.
Oh, yeah. Forgot about that
one. He talked about it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Great video, that. Excellent. Right. Goodbye.
Bye-bye. And why does it take us so long to end?